Ava woke up before the alarm that morning, just like most days. The sun hadn't yet touched the cracked glass window of the tiny apartment she shared with her grandmother. She put on the blue uniform from the mini-mart and tied her red hair into a quick bun. Life was fast-paced and she had no time to dream. As she walked through the narrow streets of a forgotten neighborhood, Ava pulled her coat tighter against the cold wind. Her old earbuds still played her favorite song, like a quiet shelter in the chaos. She was invisible to many but carried within her a strength no one could see. She arrived at work right at 7. The manager didn't even look up when she passed the counter. It was always like that. But Ava didn't mind. She did what needed to be done with dedication and honesty. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis," she said with a slight smile. The silence in return didn't shake her. Mid-morning, while organizing a stack of canned goods in the back storage room, she heard a loud crash followed by a muffled curse. She turned instinctively. A tower of boxes had collapsed near the back door. And in the middle of the mess, a tall delivery guy in a low cap and plain clothes tried to regain his balance among the fallen packages. "You okay?" she asked, walking over. He looked up for a second, and something in that gaze froze Ava. It wasn't just about looks. There was a quiet sadness there, like he carried the weight of the world. "I think only my pride got hurt," he replied with a crooked smile. Ava knelt to help him gather the boxes. "Don't worry, it happens to everyone here." He watched her for a moment as if not used to people offering help without expecting anything in return. "I'm new on this route," he said, reaching out his hand. "Antony." Ava. And for the first time that day, she felt like someone actually saw her. He shook her hand firmly but without arrogance. It was a warm, respectful touch. She smiled back, not even knowing why. The silence between them lasted just a few seconds, but it felt like a pause outside of time. When he left, Ava continued her shift with a slight knot in her stomach. It wasn't love at first sight. She didn't believe in that. But there was something different about that delivery guy. Something that raised more questions than answers. What she didn't know was that Antony also left the store with a restless heart. He drove across the city in silence, the truck full of boxes, but his mind completely adrift. For the first time in years, a simple conversation had shaken him. Antony wasn't just any delivery man. Beneath that cap and worn-out uniform was the heir to one of the largest logistics companies in the country. He was there by choice, a bet with his own father after a heated discussion about purpose and empathy. "You'll never understand the value of what you have until you know what it feels like to be ignored," he had said, walking away from the luxury of his Manhattan penthouse for a few months. The mission was simple: work at the company's base level without revealing who he was. But he hadn't expected to meet someone like Ava, someone who saw beyond appearances. That disarmed him, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. That night, Ava returned home exhausted. Her grandmother, as always, was waiting with hot soup and sweet advice. "I saw you staring off into space today," the older woman said with a playful smile. Ava laughed it off, but her thoughts went back to the delivery guy with the sad eyes. "It was just a different kind of day," she said, gazing out the window. Outside, the city remained unaware of the encounters that changed everything. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Antony took off his cap and stared at his own reflection in the simple mirror of the company's shared housing. "Why couldn't you stop smiling, you idiot?" he muttered, trying to convince himself it was just a coincidence, but it wasn't. Something had started, something neither of them could control. In the days that followed, Antony made a point to take the same route. He came up with excuses, switched shifts, anything to return to that store. And Ava, though she wouldn't admit it, kept glancing toward the back door, hoping he'd show up again. And he did. Carrying boxes like it was routine, but with his eyes always searching for her. "Hey again," he said, trying to sound casual. Ava smiled, wiping her hands on a rag. "Knocked anything over today?" And in that smile, in that glance, in the space between a simple joke, something began to bloom. Their meetings became frequent, not planned, but silently awaited by both. Ava pretended to always be busy, but her eyes searched for the familiar figure among the boxes and crates. Antony, on the other hand, made sure to arrive a few minutes early, just to watch her from a distance as she organized the shelves with care. Each short exchange seemed trivial but held a whole world of unspoken emotions. One morning, Ava surprised him with a thermos of coffee. "It's strong, just how delivery guys like it," she said, not looking him in the eye. Antony held the bottle like it was fragile. The simplicity of the gesture completely disarmed him. "No one usually thinks about that," he murmured. "Maybe you've just been around people who never really see," Ava replied with a half-smile. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck, because in that moment he knew he was falling in love. Antony kept his promise, to work like an ordinary man. But the closer he got to Ava, the harder it became to keep up the act. She treated him with dignity, no flattery, no hidden interest, and that made him want to tell her everything. He wanted her to know who he really was, but he also feared that once she found out, everything would change. That week, he spent more time in the storage room than in the truck. "Need help with these boxes?" became his excuse to linger. Ava didn't complain. She even smiled more. And between stacks of supplies and coffee breaks, a rare kind of intimacy was born, the kind that doesn't need declarations. One day, while they were stocking shelves together, Ava pointed to a box labeled with the name of a major transport company. "Ever heard of Bensley Group? Sounds like another world." Antony froze for a second. That was his family's company. "Yeah, I've heard of it, Annie, but I don't know much," he lied. She laughed, unaware of his discomfort. "Bet the owners of those companies have no idea how to lift a box." He swallowed hard, and once again, he felt the weight of his lie. That secret was growing silently between them, like cracks forming in what once felt like solid ground. But he didn't know how to tell her without losing her. Meanwhile, Ava had started to wonder. Antony seemed different. Not like the other delivery guys who only talked about paychecks or schedules. He referenced books, spoke casually about economics, and mentioned fancy places with ease. "Where did you study?" she once asked. He avoided the question. "Here and there." She didn't push. She'd learned early that everyone carries their own secrets, and respect often lives in silence. But there was something there, a quiet brilliance, a disguised sadness. And Ava, who was good at reading between the lines, felt Antony was more than he let on. Even if she didn't know why, she waited for him, and that was enough. At home, her grandmother started noticing. "You've been singing while you cook," she said one evening. Ava laughed, a little embarrassed. "It's just the radio." But she knew it wasn't. It was him. The way he looked at her without rushing, like she was the first person who truly deserved to be heard. And for someone like Ava, that was rare. Across the city, Antony's phone buzzed constantly with messages from his father. "Come back, you've learned enough." But he wasn't ready. For the first time, something made sense. He didn't just want to win a bet. He wanted to understand what it meant to be seen without the armor of wealth. And Ava saw him. One day, after a delivery, they sat behind the store sharing a sandwich. Ava talked about her tough childhood, the jobs she'd worked, the dreams she'd put on hold to care for her grandmother. Antony listened silently, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're amazing," he said suddenly. She blushed. "No, I just survive." He wanted to hold her shoulders and say yes, she was amazing. But he only smiled, respecting her space. Still, his heart had crossed an invisible line. He knew the feeling was growing, but the truth still stood between them. A truth too big to ignore much longer. Ava wasn't naive. She had been hurt before. She knew something this good might have an expiration date. But part of her wanted to believe. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to hide who she was. She didn't have to prove her worth. With Antony, she could simply be. And that was too precious to let go. On a rainy Saturday, he showed up at the store without a delivery scheduled. "I came to see you," he said plainly. Ava laughed, surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "I want to show you something. Do you trust me?" She hesitated for a second, then answered with a smile. "Yes." They went to a small cafe tucked between old streets. There, he ordered hot chocolate for her and tea for himself. They sat by the window, watching the rain. The conversation was light, honest. She talked about her fear of trusting people. He talked about feeling trapped in a life he hadn't chosen. No names, no fortune. The connection between them grew like a quiet fire. It didn't need declarations to burn. Just lingering glances, comfortable silences, small gestures. And each time he whispered her name, Ava felt something inside her soften, like she'd finally found a place to rest. When he walked her home, he held her hand a moment longer than needed. "You make me want to be better," he said without thinking. Ava looked at him serious. "Then be." And she walked in. Antony stood in front of the door for minutes. So simple, so direct, but so powerful, as if she had read his soul. That night, he wrote a letter. He told her everything. Who he was, why he was there, what he felt. But he didn't have the courage to give it to her. He folded the page and tucked it into his bag. It wasn't time. Not yet. But the secret was eating at him, and he knew that with each passing day the fall could be harder. In her room, Ava rested her forehead against the window. Outside, the city seemed asleep. But inside her heart was wide awake. It wasn't just attraction. It was as if Antony was a mirror of everything she'd never dared to say out loud. And that terrified her. The following days passed like a quiet dream. They saw each other, smiled, shared confessions, without naming what they were feeling. But something was changing. Ava was starting to trust, and Antony was starting to fear. Because sooner or later, the mask would fall, and he didn't know if the love born from truth could survive the lie. The next Friday, Ava invited him to dinner at her place. "My grandma wants to meet you," she said casually. Antony froze. Part of him longed for it. Another part knew he was stepping onto dangerous ground. But he said yes, because he couldn't keep running from what he felt. When he stepped into the modest home, filled with the scent of lovingly made food, and saw the elderly woman smiling with kind eyes, something broke inside him. The home he never had, the genuine affection, the richness of simplicity. And in that moment, Antony knew he was deeper into this than he ever imagined. And there was no turning back. Ava's house was small but full of warmth. The peeling walls held memories and laughter, and the smell of her grandmother's homemade chicken pie filled the air. Antony sat at the table with a knot in his throat, not because of the food, but because of what it represented. This was family. Love without conditions. "So you're the guy with the truck?" the elderly woman asked with a subtle smile. Antony nodded, trying not to look nervous. "Yes, ma'am. That's me." Ava watched the scene tenderly. It was rare to see her grandmother take interest in someone new. And in that moment, she felt something in her chest. Safety. During dinner, they talked about everything, except money. They laughed over childhood stories, swapped recipes, and listened to old songs on the kitchen radio. Antony felt like he was in another world, far from luxury events and boardrooms. Here he was just himself, and for the first time, that was enough. When he left, Ava's grandmother turned to her with wisdom in her voice. "That boy carries a burden, but there's light in him too." Ava didn't answer. She simply leaned against the doorframe and watched Antony walk toward the gate. There was something about him that escaped the eyes, but touched the soul. The next day, Antony arrived at work with heavy shoulders. The letter he had written was still tucked in his backpack. The words begged to be spoken, but the fear was stronger. What if she pulled away? What if she found out and thought it was all a cruel joke? He couldn't bear to lose her. Meanwhile, Ava was fighting her own doubts. She felt more drawn to him than she'd ever felt before. But part of her was suspicious. Antony was too composed to be just a delivery guy. He reacted with grace to rude remarks like someone used to being respected. And his manner, there was something more. During their lunch break, they sat behind the store as usual. The sky was gray and a light drizzle had begun to fall. "You seem distant today," she said. Antony looked at the ground. "It's just, there are things in me I don't know how to show yet." Ava looked at him softly. "When you're ready, I'll be here." Her response was simple, but it pierced right through his armor. He wanted to drop everything, the company, the secrets, the fear. But it wasn't time yet, because this wasn't just about love, it was about courage. That night, in his Manhattan penthouse, Antony's father reviewed his son's reports. "He's getting too involved," he said to his advisor. "Maybe it's time to pull him back." The advisor hesitated. "Sir, it seems like he's found something that actually drives him." The father chuckled, skeptical. "Or someone." The next day, without warning, Ava found Antony standing at her door. He didn't say much, just handed her a flower he'd picked on the way. "It's not for a special occasion," he said. "I just thought of you." She took the flower, gently, surprised and touched. "Then now it is special." Their bond was growing stronger, more honest, and more dangerous. Every moment was filled with longing and fear. And the deeper Antony fell, the harder it became to live with the lie. He hated hiding the truth, but he feared that telling it might mean losing her forever. One day, Ava invited him to a folk art exhibit at a community center. It was simple, with paintings by local artists and amateur performances. But Antony's eyes lit up as if he were at a gallery in Paris. "You see beauty where no one else does," he told her. "Because I grew up with nowhere to find it," she replied. As they walked through the old streets after the event, he took her hand. It was the first time. Ava didn't pull away, but she didn't say anything either. They stayed silent, listening to the sound of their steps blending with the city. That one touch held more truth than any spoken words. As time went on, rumors began to spread in the company. "Heard there's some big shot undercover in the warehouses." Antony pretended not to hear, but he knew it was only a matter of time before someone found out. Worse, before Ava heard it from someone else. One Sunday morning, she invited him for a walk in the park. "There's something about you that doesn't add up," she said, looking into his eyes. You're kind, but distant. Smart, but guarded. Antony froze. The moment had arrived. But instead of telling the truth, he lied again. It's just a past I'd rather forget. Ava believed him, wanted to believe him, but something inside her started preparing for a fall. Still, she didn't walk away, because what they had was real, or at least it felt like it. And sometimes hope speaks louder than instinct. That night, Antony got a call. It was his father. "The foundation needs you at the charity gala. It'll be televised." Antony refused. "I can't disappear right now." His father laughed. "It's because of her, isn't it? But you know lies have an expiration date." Antony hung up, more torn than ever. Ava's grandmother noticed the shift in her granddaughter's expression. "You're falling in love, but you're scared," she said gently. Ava nodded. "It's like something's pulling me forward while something else holds me back." Her grandmother smiled. "That's how it feels when the heart starts growing. It needs to stretch." Their encounters grew quieter, heavier, the affection more visible, and so were the doubts. Ava felt that something was coming, and Antony knew that if he didn't come clean soon, he would lose the chance to do it with dignity. But how do you admit you were never just the guy at the back door? And so, between restrained kisses, unspoken promises, and eyes begging for truth, they kept building something on unsteady ground. Love was blooming, but on fragile roots, and time, relentless, was starting to ask for its price. One cloudy afternoon, Ava was walking alone to the store when she overheard two co-workers whispering. "I heard the new delivery guy's got a luxury car parked in another neighborhood. Can you believe that?" The other laughed. "Probably some bored rich guy playing poor." Ava froze. The words hit her like an invisible punch. Those words echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. She tried to brush them off, tried to rationalize, but the one thing she'd always avoided now haunted her. What if what she felt was built on a lie? What if it was all an act? What if the man she was starting to fall for wasn't real at all? Ava couldn't sleep that night. The words from her co-workers echoed in her head like a constant alarm. She replayed every conversation with Antony, every glance, every phrase that now seemed to carry double meaning. She felt betrayed, even without proof. Her tight chest battled silently against reason. The next morning, she knew she needed answers. She waited for Antony at the usual spot near the back door. When he showed up, smiling as always, something inside her faltered. The anger she had rehearsed turned into anguish. But she went straight to the point. "Who are you really, Antony?" He froze. Her words left no room to run. For a second, he considered lying again. But Ava's eyes begged for honesty, and for the first time, he took a deep breath and said, "I'm not just a delivery guy." She didn't speak, just crossed her arms and waited. Antony then told her the truth about the bet with his father, the company, the hidden identity, and how he wanted to understand what it meant to be seen without status. "I never lied about how I feel," he finished. But it was too late. Ava didn't cry. She just stood in silence like someone watching a castle collapse in slow motion. "You had so many chances to tell me, and you chose silence." He tried to step closer, but she backed away. "You stole the only thing I offer with trust, the truth," Antony tried to explain, but everything sounded like empty justification. Ava turned her back and walked into the store without looking back. In that moment, the connection they had built so carefully shattered. Because to her, the lie wasn't about money. It was about not believing she could handle the truth. The news spread faster than he expected. A coworker snapped a photo of him getting out of a luxury car and posted it online. The delivery guy was a millionaire in disguise. Within hours, Ava saw it on her phone. What hurt most wasn't the scandal. It was the confirmation. At home, her grandmother noticed the dark cloud in Ava's eyes. "He lied," Ava said, her voice trembling. "He pretended to be someone he wasn't." Her grandmother listened quietly, then took her hand. "But was what he showed you fake too?" Ava hesitated. "I don't know what was real anymore." Antony didn't have the courage to face her for days, but he couldn't go back to life as before. The city felt colder. The company duties returned, social events pulled at him, but he couldn't disconnect. Because she had changed everything, and now he'd lost her to his own fear. On impulse, he drove to her house. Her grandmother greeted him on the porch kindly. "She doesn't want to see anyone." Antony nodded. "Even so, I had to come." She looked at him with tired but gentle eyes. "Boy, the problem was never that you were rich, it was that you hid what mattered." That same night, Ava walked alone to the community center where she used to help with local fairs. She needed something to remind her of who she was. She got involved in conversations, helped plan a charity event, and tried, unsuccessfully, to forget Antony. But everything felt gray without him. Meanwhile, Antony locked himself in his penthouse, staring at the city from above with a hollow feeling. For the first time, he realized no amount of money could buy the sense of belonging he had felt beside Ava. And that truth hurt too much to ignore. The media now wanted interviews. They were after the undercover millionaire. But he turned them all down. "There's nothing interesting here," he said. What really mattered wasn't newsworthy. It was a real story, quiet, flawed, messy, like every love story that's worth it. After a week, Ava decided to return the dried flower he had once given her. She placed it in an envelope with a note. "Everything born from lies dies in doubt." She handed it to her grandmother, who promised to give it to Antony if he came back. Was it the end, or just a pause? When he received the envelope, Antony read it in silence. It hurt more than any scream would have, because she was right. But he also knew he couldn't give up. Not after learning so much beside her. The truth hurt, but it also set him free. So he decided to act. For the first time, not as a CEO, not as an heir, but as a man. He called the community center and made an anonymous donation large enough to fund its full renovation. He asked them not to publish his name. He just wanted to give something back to the city. To her. The next day, Ava heard about the donation while helping clean the place. "Someone did this for us," they said. She smiled bitterly. Part of her already knew. Only one person would do something like that and hide their name. And in that silent gesture, she began to see. Maybe he had changed. Antony returned to driving through the streets that had made him human. He passed by her house without stopping. By the store. The park. Every place where she had left a trace of truth. It was as if he were searching for forgiveness in the paths where he once looked for excuses. One afternoon, as Ava left the community center, she saw the old truck parked on the corner. Antony stepped out slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't try to come closer. He simply said, "If there's still something, anything, let me show you who I really am, now, with no mask." Ava looked at him. There were no tears, no anger, just an old fatigue and a new hope. "You'll have to prove that to me, not with words." And she walked away. But for the first time in days, her heart wasn't closed. Because even through the disappointment, she still cared. And that was the beginning of another chance. Antony didn't sleep that night. Ava's words echoed in his mind. "You'll have to prove it, not with words." And he understood. She didn't want promises. She wanted action. She wanted presence. For the first time, the man who always relied on arguments and speeches realized that sometimes silence and consistency are more powerful than any well-crafted excuse. The next morning, he returned to the community center, not as a donor, not as a millionaire, but as a volunteer. He put on gloves, grabbed a broom, and started sweeping the courtyard. People stared. No one recognized him as the man from the headlines anymore. He didn't care. He wanted to start from the bottom again, but this time, with truth. Ava watched from a distance. She didn't come close. She kept helping the children with their reading activities, but she saw him clean the windows, help an elderly man carry benches, stop to listen to stories no one else cared to hear. And without realizing it, something inside her began to soften, slowly. In the days that followed, he kept showing up. He never invaded her space, never forced conversation. He was just there, constant, present, willing. One gesture at a time, one brick at a time. Antony joined the community kitchen, cooking meals, serving lines, washing dishes late into the evening. Ava tried to remain indifferent, but it was impossible. How could she ignore someone who let go of pride to learn how to serve? How could she not notice a man who, even hurt, stayed? What made her hesitate wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of believing and being hurt again. But he asked for nothing, and that moved her. One afternoon, one of the children gave Antony a drawing. It was him holding a flower, smiling wide. "You're the guy who really helps," the boy said. Antony looked at the paper as if it were gold, and Ava saw the emotion in his face from across the room. That couldn't be fake. At the end of the day, while she was packing up materials, Ava slowly approached. "He liked you," she said, referring to the boy. Antony just nodded respectfully. "He reminded me what matters." She was quiet for a few seconds, then whispered, "Keep showing it. It's still not enough." And she walked away. The next day, Antony arrived even earlier. He reorganized the books in the community library, cleaned the shelves, made new labels for the worn-out titles. It was invisible work, but it was where he wanted to be. Doing what no one noticed for. The place that reconnected him with his soul. It was his way of asking for forgiveness without words. Ava noticed every detail. At night, she spoke with her grandmother about the feelings she tried to hide. "He's not the same as before," she admitted. "Or maybe now he's truly himself." Her grandmother smiled wisely. "Love isn't about perfection, Ava. It's about what you do after the mistake." And those words stayed with her. On Saturday, during the community fair, the center's coordinator made an announcement. "We have a new pillar here. Someone who came in silently and showed, through action, what presence really means." Then he handed Antony a small badge, officially naming him a volunteer. He tried to decline. Ava at the back of the room clapped quietly. After the event, as everyone celebrated, Ava approached him again. "Why do you keep coming back?" Antony looked at her with raw sincerity. "Because I found meaning here, and because everything I do here brings me closer to the man I want to be," she simply said. "Then keep coming." The closeness began to grow again. In the following days, she started talking to him during tasks. They talked about simple things: the kids, the books, the overly strong coffee. No mention of the past. It was like they were rebuilding from scratch. Antony knew every word from her was a second chance in disguise. On a quiet afternoon, while putting up posters for a new education campaign, their fingers brushed. Ava didn't pull away. She just let the touch linger. For several long seconds. Antony felt his breath catch. That small contact said more than any apology ever could. She was beginning to let him in, and he knew he couldn't mess it up. A new project began at the center, the creation of a community garden. Antony, once used to meetings with million-dollar deals, now got his hands dirty with soil, and he loved it. He planted, watered, talked with neighbors about seeds and harvests. He was a different man, or maybe just the man he'd always wanted to be. One afternoon, Ava handed him a folded piece of paper. "I found this in the back of your backpack while cleaning the donation room." It was the letter he'd never had the courage to give her. Antony read his own past in front of her, throat tight. "Did you read it?" She shook her head. "I didn't have to. Your actions already said everything." Another day, while cleaning the hall for a children's event, it started to rain hard. The power flickered. For a few minutes, they were in the dark, just the two of them, sitting close with flashlights and makeshift candles. Antony looked at her. Ava looked away. Then she looked back. "You're still here." He moved closer. "I'm not leaving again." The silence grew thick. Ava rested her head on his shoulder without saying a word. And in that gesture, there was more forgiveness than any speech could hold. They weren't ready for promises, but they were ready to begin again. And that was enough. From that day on, they walked home together after their shifts. Nothing official, no labels, just shared presence at the end of each day. People started to notice. Some exchanged knowing smiles. Others whispered. But Ava didn't care. This was her story, built the right way this time. One night in front of her house, Antony held Ava's hand. "Can I take you tomorrow?" She nodded. "But not as a delivery guy, not as a millionaire." She smiled. "Then take me as you." He smiled back. And for the first time, that smile was light. No guilt, no secrets, just real. And so, step by step, what once seemed like ruins became rebuilding. Love didn't return like lightning. It returned like soft rain. Steady, calm, persistent. Antony learned to love without masks. Ava relearned how to trust. And together, even without knowing what the future would bring, they had already begun planting something new. This time, with roots. Ava and Antony's romance continued like a beautiful secret, held quietly between simple walls and soft laughter. They didn't call themselves a couple yet, but their hands found each other without hesitation. There was something tender in the life they shared, splitting coffee, silent nights, childhood stories. Love grew slowly but with strong roots. Even the oldest neighbors smiled when they passed by. It was as if the city had blessed them. Antony hadn't returned to his Manhattan penthouse. He now lived in a small apartment near the community center. He had traded luxury for simplicity, not out of obligation but by choice. There he found peace. He learned to fix leaks, cook without apps, live without being served, and most importantly, he learned to listen. Ava was his quiet teacher. With her, he discovered that love isn't proven through grand gestures, but through consistency. Everything seemed to be falling into place until the day Ava received a golden envelope at home. It was addressed to Miss Ava Coleman and guest. On the cover, the crest of the Bensley Group. Inside, an invitation to the annual gala dinner hosted by Antony's Family Foundation, the same event he had refused to attend. She froze. He hadn't mentioned a word about it. A strange chill ran down her spine. That night, Ava faced Antony in silence. He was washing dishes in the community kitchen when she approached, the envelope in hand. "This came for me." Antony dried his hands slowly, reading the invitation like it might explode. "I didn't know they would send that. It was my father." His tone was honest but tired. "He wants to pull me back in." Ava crossed her arms. "And are you going?" Antony didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath, staring at the floor. "I don't know." Ava nodded silently. That said everything. More than she wanted to hear. After everything, his doubt was still there. Not about her, but about who he was when he wasn't with her. And that hurt. He saw her expression, and added urgently, "But I'm not going anywhere without you." In the following days, something shifted between them. They didn't argue, but they didn't laugh like before either. There was a heavy silence between conversations. Ava tried to understand. What if he went back to his old life? What if all of this was just a temporary escape? Antony, on the other hand, felt torn. He loved this new world, but the old one echoed insistently. The doubt consumed him. Tension rose when Antony's father appeared at the community center. Wearing a flawless suit and a superior gaze, he looked around with quiet disdain. "So this is where you've been hiding?" he asked, staring at his son. Antony said nothing. Ava stood nearby, watching from a distance. "You've had your time playing poor. Now come be who you were born to be." Ava stepped forward. "He's exactly where he chose to be," she said firmly. Antony's father glanced at her, head to toe. "And I suppose you're the reason?" She didn't flinch. "No, the choice was his." Antony looked at Ava as if seeing her strength all over again, and loving her even more for it. But he also felt the weight of the challenge ahead. After the visit, Antony fell into silence for days. Ava gave him space, but the emptiness gnawed at her. Until one night he showed up at her door with tearful eyes. "I'm tired of splitting myself," he said. "I don't want to live between two worlds. But I can't pretend the other one doesn't exist. I'm part of it too." Ava listened quietly. "Then why are you here now?" he whispered. "Because here is where I can breathe." The charity gala was scheduled for Saturday. Antony didn't want to go, but his father threatened to cut off funding to the community center, the one Ava had fought so hard to support. The news hit like a bomb. "He'll pull everything if you don't go?" she asked, shocked. Antony nodded, defeated. "He knows where to hit me." Ava closed her eyes. "Then go. But I'm going with you." That night, she pulled out a simple blue dress from the back of her closet, the one she'd worn at her cousin's wedding. It was the nicest thing she owned. Antony, in turn, brought out the jacket he hadn't worn since leaving his old life behind. It wasn't about appearances, it was about facing the past together, and it scared them. They arrived at the event hand in hand. All eyes turned to Ava. Whispers, polite judgment, curious stares. But she stood tall. Antony introduced her proudly. "This is Ava, the woman who taught me how to live." The elite's fake smiles didn't intimidate her. She didn't belong to that world, but she didn't need to. During the dinner, Antony's father gave a speech praising his son's transformation and thanking Ava for attending. but there was venom beneath the words, as if to say, "You've won for now, but this world is mine." Antony squeezed Ava's hand under the table. She didn't look away. She was there for him, but also for herself. After dinner, a reporter approached. "Are you the simple girl from the millionaire's story?" Ava took a deep breath. "I'm the woman he met when he stopped pretending." The phrase went viral the next day, but in that moment it was just truth. And Antony looked at her with a racing heart. She protected him, even when she was hurting inside. On the way home, she stayed quiet in the car. Antony broke the silence. "You hate all of this, don't you?" Ava sighed. "No, I hate what it tries to do to you." He pulled over, looked into her eyes. "I don't want to be divided, Ava. I'm just still trying to figure out how to unite it all." In the days that followed, Ava returned to her work at the community center. But now reporters hovered around. Children were photographed. Donations poured in. But the peace was gone. Antony tried to shield the place, but everything felt out of control. The love they had protected in silence was now too exposed. And that threatened everything. One morning, Ava found him in the center's courtyard, head down. "I think I ruined the place we love most," he said. Ava walked over and placed her hand on his. "You didn't ruin it. You just need to fix it." He looked at her like she was his last bit of hope, and even tired, she was still his anchor. So Antony made a decision. He called a press conference, gave a short but powerful speech. "The community center will no longer be associated with my family. We will not use real lives as marketing, and we will donate, anonymously, whatever is needed to keep it alive." Ava watched from afar, and for the first time, allowed herself to smile. After the conference, he found her sitting on the steps outside. "You did the right thing," she said. "So did you," he replied. He sat beside her. "I think now the hardest part begins." Ava looked at him. "Bringing both worlds together?" He nodded. "But this time, together." And she answered with a soft kiss. No promises, but full of truth. That night, they walked hand in hand through the neighborhood streets again. The luxury was behind them. So were the cameras. There was only them now, and the simple glow of street lamps, the gentle breeze, and a quiet, steady feeling. They had survived the hardest test. And together, they were ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed the press conference were calm, but full of meaning. The media faded away little by little, and the community center returned to its routine. Ava and Antony could finally breathe. They walked side by side like two people who had chosen to stay, even after the storm. Their love was no longer a surprise. It was presence. It wasn't about enchantment anymore, but about permanence. And that was even more valuable. Antony renovated the apartment with his own hands, helped by the neighbors. He replaced tiles, painted walls, built a small bookshelf for Ava's favorite novels. He hired no one. He wanted to feel the transformation with his fingers. He wanted their new home to smell of effort, not opulence. When Ava saw it finished, she didn't cry. She just walked over, hugged him from behind, and said, "Here I stay." Little by little, they blended their routines. Ava continued teaching and working on her projects, while Antony, now officially detached from the Bensley Group, sought new ways to use his experience. Together, they created a vocational training program for underprivileged youth. She taught from the heart. He organized everything behind the scenes with discipline. The project grew, not through fame, but through devotion. And their love grew too, quietly, steadily. At one of the weekly meetings with the youth, Antony told his story for the first time. No filters, no titles. He spoke of how he'd spent years living to meet expectations, until a girl from a forgotten neighborhood taught him the meaning of truth. The room applauded, but Ava, watching from the back, simply smiled with teary eyes. She knew that speech wasn't rehearsed, it was lived. Evenings became their sacred time. They'd sit on the NGO's porch, sipping tea and talking about the day. They didn't need grand plans. Sometimes, silence was enough. Antony read passages from Ava's favorite books. She, resting her head on his shoulder, whispered that he was learning to listen with his heart. And he was. One day, they received an offer from an international foundation to expand their program to other cities. It was a rare opportunity, but it involved travel, formal meetings, and exposure. Ava hesitated. What if we go back to everything we worked so hard to leave behind? Antony held her hand. We don't have to change who we are. We just need to remember where we came from. And finally, she agreed. Their first trip was to Denver. They spoke to a room full of investors. Ava was clear and direct, her sensitivity shining through. Antony presented the numbers, but always circled back to the faces, to the real stories. In the end, the proposal was accepted with enthusiasm. But what mattered most was what he said. Backstage, I'll never lose myself again, because now, I know who I am. When they returned, something had shifted. Their relationship was no longer a promise. It was a daily choice. Conversations about the future became more frequent. Marriage, children, stay here, expand the project. The questions weren't rushed. They were asked with care. They were two people in love who also respected each other's timing. And that was beautiful. One afternoon, Ava was called for an interview at a private school, a dream position, but far from home. Antony encouraged her. If that's what your heart wants, I'll come with you. She smiled. But what about the project? He cupped her face. I didn't choose you only when it was easy. I choose you every day, even if the path changes. Ava turned down the job. Not out of fear, but because she realized her mission was still there. In that community. With those children. In that reality. She told Antony, her eyes glowing. I choose to stay. And not for you. For me. He smiled, proud. He knew that was her greatest act of freedom. One special evening, the community center held a celebration to mark the first year of their joint project. Hanging lights, soft music, real hugs. Antony watched from afar, a glass of juice in hand. Ava walked up and asked, "What are you thinking about?" He answered calmly, "How lucky I was to stumble into you." Later, on the improvised dance floor, he asked for her hand. Not with a ring, not with flashbulbs, just with steady eyes and a quiet voice. Will you build with me all the new beginnings still to come? Ava laughed through tears. Only if there are real bricks and plenty of tea. They danced slowly, and the world seemed to fall silent around them. The proposal was informal, but sincere. The months that followed were filled with simple planning, a small ceremony, outdoors with friends and neighbors. No luxurious dresses, no expensive bands, just truth, love, presence, and the choice to stay, even knowing the risks. Ava learned that loving Antony also meant learning to live with his restlessness. He was intense, idealistic, always moving. She was grounded, observant, steady. But together they created balance. He pushed her to dream bigger. She anchored him when the sky felt too heavy. They were different, and that's exactly why they fit. One rainy afternoon, Ava found Antony barefoot in the community library, reorganizing books, soaking wet, laughing to himself. "You're completely mad," she said. He pulled her close and replied, "I am, but I'm yours." And they kissed right there, between wet books and unspoken promises. Because their love was like that, unexpected and real. Ava's grandmother watched everything with eyes full of tenderness. She always said, "He didn't save you, my dear, and you didn't save him. You simply saw each other." And that phrase echoed in Ava's heart whenever fear knocked. Because it was true. They didn't rescue one another. They just recognized each other in the chaos and chose to stay. One morning, while having coffee on the porch, Antony handed Ava an envelope. Inside was a deed, transferring ownership of the community center to the neighborhood. It was now legally an independent, protected space. Ava cried. "You gave it back to the people," he replied. "You taught me the value of that." The neighborhood began to see the two of them as a symbol of something rare. Love with roots. Children grew up mentioning their names. Young people came to them for advice. They never wanted to be an example, just to live in truth. But because they had chosen love even when it was hard, they became a light for many. On the night before their wedding, Ava sat with her grandmother reading Antony's old letters, including the first one he'd never given her. "He wasn't perfect," she said. Her grandmother nodded. "But you never wanted perfect, Ava. You just wanted someone who stayed." And now he would. And so, between planted roots, retold stories, and intertwined hands, Ava and Antony prepared for what was to come. Their love was no longer surprising. It was a choice. And what they had built together was stronger than any lie, any difference, any fear. Because when love learns to stay, nothing is temporary anymore. The day dawned with a clear sky, a soft breeze, and a silence that felt different. The kind of silence that comes right before something beautiful. Ava woke before the alarm, her heart racing. It wasn't nerves. It was gratitude. When she looked out the window, she saw the community center courtyard being decorated with simple flowers and makeshift benches. That was where she would get married, where everything began, where he saw her, where she chose to stay. Antony wore a light shirt and linen trousers. No suit, no grandeur. In the mirror, he adjusted his collar with trembling hands, not from insecurity but emotion. Outside, neighbors arranged paper lanterns. Children carried baskets filled with dry leaves instead of petals. He took a deep breath. He knew the weight of that moment. There was no audience, only community. And in front of them, he would declare what he already lived every day. Ava's grandmother was the first to arrive, seated in the front row with a blanket over her knees and a smile in her eyes. Beside her were longtime neighbors, teachers, young adults shaped by the project. It all felt so real it could have been a movie. But it wasn't fiction. It was consequence. It was love that had endured, returned, and stayed. And now, it was becoming a promise. Ava walked down the aisle formed between trees, escorted by one of the girls from the NGO. Her dress was white, simple, with lace hand-stitched by neighborhood volunteers. In her hair, a tiny flower, the same one Antony had given her the first time she smiled at him. She walked with calm certainty. No doubt, no rush, just conviction. She was walking toward the man who had learned to love her, without needing to win her with anything but presence. When Antony's eyes met hers, everything else disappeared. No sound, no voices. Just that look, the same look that saw potential when she felt invisible, the same look that silently asked for forgiveness, the same one that chose to stay. They walked closer and held each other's hands like they were holding the whole world. The officiant was the coordinator of the community center. The ceremony began with simple words. No long speeches, no formalities. He spoke about roots, about choices, about love that is built. When it came time for vows, Antony pulled a folded paper from his pocket and put it away. The truth is everything I needed to say is already in everything we've lived. He looked into Ava's eyes. You saw me when I didn't even know who I was. You taught me that love isn't about winning, but about staying. That love isn't proven with gifts, but with silence, listening, and time. I won't promise you perfection, just presence, just truth, just a love that learns. Ava took a deep breath. I used to be afraid to love you. I thought you were just a beautiful lie, but I watched you shed everything. I saw the man behind the name, and I chose to stay. Not because you changed for me, but because you became someone who inspires me to be better. And for that, I stay. Today, tomorrow, every day. The applause was soft, like no one wanted to disturb something sacred. The rings were simple silver. Their hands trembled as they slipped them on, but their eyes sparkled. When the kiss came, it wasn't cinematic. It was slow, quiet, full of history. A kiss that sealed what was already written in their hearts. The celebration was made of homemade food, live music by NGO youth, and a lot of laughter. Ava danced with her grandmother. Antony poured juice for guests. Children ran barefoot between flower-covered benches. There was no luxury, but there was abundance, no spectacle, but pure truth, and that was enough. Later, as the sun set, Ava and Antony slipped away for a moment. They climbed to the rooftop of the center, the same spot where he gave his first speech. They sat side by side in silence, watching the city slowly light up. Are you afraid of the future? She asked. He smiled. No, because for the first time, it makes sense. She rested her head on his shoulder. Remember when I said everything born from a lie dies in doubt? He nodded quietly. Well, now I understand that sometimes even lies can give birth to truths. Because what we had at the start was confusion. But what we have now is choice. They stayed there for long minutes. The breeze blew gently, the city breathed, and so did their hearts. Antony squeezed her hand. Promise me something? Ava smiled. Depends. He looked at her. Promise to remind me every day that love is built. She replied, only if you promise to never stop planting with me. The next morning, they opened the doors of the community center just like any other day. They welcomed the children, poured coffee, picked up scattered books. No new signs, no evidence that a wedding had happened there. Because it wasn't a stage, it was a home. And a home is built in silence. A young girl from the project approached. Ava, your wedding was beautiful. But what struck me most was the way you looked at him like he was solid ground. Ava smiled. He is, but he also makes me fly. The girl asked, and what are you to him? Ava answered without hesitation, the reason he learned to walk barefoot. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal, but something in Antony's eyes had changed. A kind of peace he'd never known. He was whole, not because everything was perfect, but because he had stopped running. and now walked beside someone who knew how to stay. On Sundays, they walked to the market together, bought bread, fruit, tea. People greeted them naturally, as if they were already part of the landscape. And they were just two among many. And yet, they were different. Because they had chosen to love in a world that teaches you to run. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of the NGO, Ava looked out at the horizon and murmured, "Remember when you pretended to be a delivery guy?" He laughed. "I remember you picking up the boxes I dropped." She added, "You arrived all messed up, but you helped me sort everything out inside." He replied, "You gave me what no one ever had, belonging." The golden light bathed their faces. Behind them, the city kept moving. But on that porch, everything stood still, everything healed. Ava smiled and held Antony's face in both hands. "The world may change, seasons may come and go, but as long as you're my home, I'll always know where to return." And there, among leaves dancing in the wind, hands intertwined in silence and hearts that no longer needed to explain themselves. The story ended, not with a period, but with ellipses, because their love wasn't a fairy tale. It was rarer, it was real, and what's real remains. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with flowers or declarations. Sometimes it comes disguised, in silence, in glances that linger, in gestures that seem small, but carry the whole world. Antony pretended to be a delivery man to understand life, but ended up being delivered to love, to truth, and to a woman who saw him when no one else did. Ava wasn't searching for a fairy tale. She just wanted someone who wouldn't run at the first stumble. And she found a man who learned how to stay. This is not a story about a millionaire who lost everything. It's about a man who finally discovered the value of everything when he allowed himself to feel. And it's not about a simple girl who was saved. It's about a strong woman who taught that love doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs truth, because sometimes all someone needs is to be seen, and all love needs is to be built. If this story touched your heart, comment below with a heart and share the moment that moved you the most. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and share this story with someone who believes in the power of real love. Because stories like this aren't just fiction. They might be happening right now, maybe closer than you think.